The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from 47 different species gathered for what many believed would be the final session before war. Ambassador Zethkar of the Vorthak Empire stood at the central podium, his 6 arms gesticulating wildly as he delivered what amounted to an ultimatum. The human species has had 3 rotations to comply with Galactic Defense Protocol 847, his voice echoed through the translation matrices. They have refused to submit their military capabilities for inspection. They have refused to join the Unified Defense Network. Most concerning of all, they have refused to explain their mysterious victories against the Krell Hive. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled delegates. The Krell Hive had been the galaxy's greatest threat for over 2 centuries. Their biomechanical ships could regenerate from almost any damage, their warrior drones felt no pain or fear, and their hive mind coordination made them nearly impossible to outmaneuver. Yet somehow, this young species called humanity had not only repelled 3 major Krell incursions but had done so with minimal losses. Ambassador Sarah Chin sat quietly in the human delegation section, her face a mask of diplomatic neutrality. Behind her, the other human representatives maintained the same composed silence that had frustrated the council for months. They listened, they observed, but they rarely spoke unless directly questioned. The Terran Federation's secrecy threatens the stability of our entire alliance, continued Zethkar. How can we trust allies who refuse transparency? How can we coordinate defense strategies when one member keeps their capabilities hidden? High Chancellor Morvik of the Altarian Republic rose from his crystalline chair. As the Council's senior member, his words carried significant weight. Ambassador Chen, your people have been granted unprecedented autonomy since joining our alliance. But the Krell threat grows stronger with each passing cycle. We need to understand how humanity consistently defeats enemies that have brought entire star systems to their knees. Sarah stood slowly, her movements deliberate and measured. The chamber fell silent, all eyes focusing on the human representative. She was unremarkable by galactic standards, no enhanced physiology, no natural armor plating, no telepathic abilities. Just a bipedal creature in a simple blue uniform. Honored Chancellor, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber without amplification, humanity appreciates the Council's concern. However, we maintain that our defensive strategies remain within the bounds of our sovereignty agreement. That is unacceptable, snapped General Frack of the Hegemony's War Council. The massive, insectoid being's mandibles clicked aggressively. My fleets have studied the aftermath of your battles with the Krell. We find debris fields with no logical pattern of destruction. Krell ships simply stop functioning. No energy signatures, no weapon residue, no trace of how they were destroyed. Sarah nodded slightly. We understand your curiosity, General. Curiosity? Thrax's voice rose to a screech. 16 hegemony battlegroups were annihilated by a single Krell hive cluster last rotation. Yet you claim to have destroyed 3 such clusters with a handful of vessels. Either you possess weapons of unprecedented power, or you are lying about your victories. The chamber erupted in heated discussions. Some delegates demanded immediate inspection of human ships, others called for expulsion from the alliance if transparency wasn't forthcoming. Through it all, the human delegation sat in perfect silence, their expressions unreadable. Sarah raised her hand, and, somehow, despite the chaos, the gesture commanded attention. The chamber gradually quieted. The Terran Federation values its relationship with the Galactic Council, she said. However, we cannot comply with demands that compromise our operational security. We have honored every agreement regarding territorial boundaries, trade regulations, and mutual defense obligations. But, not transparency, pressed Zethkar. Your ships appear, engage the enemy, and disappear. Your crews never communicate during battle. Your vessels show no energy signatures that our sensors can identify. You fight like ghosts. Perhaps, Sarah replied quietly, that tells you everything you need to know. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Delegate Yixtal of the Synthetic Collective's optical arrays flickered rapidly, their equivalent of nervous laughter. You speak in riddles, human. Are you claiming stealth technology superior to anything in the known galaxy? I am claiming nothing beyond what we have demonstrated, Sarah answered. Humanity defends itself effectively. We fulfill our alliance obligations. What more do you require? Admiral Corinth of the United Worlds Navy leaned forward. As a veteran of countless Krell encounters, his scarred features bore witness to the enemy's devastating capabilities. What we require, he said slowly, is understanding. I have lost ships, crews, entire battle groups to the Krell. My people die while yours return home unharmed. If you possess some advantage, some weapon or strategy that could save lives across the galaxy, withholding it borders on genocide. For the first time, Sarah's composure seemed to crack slightly. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Admiral, humanity grieves for every life lost in this conflict. But, you assume our methods are transferable to other species. You assume our capabilities can be shared or replicated. These assumptions may be incorrect. Then, explain why they cannot be shared, demanded Chancellor Morvik. Give us something more than vague statements and diplomatic deflection. Sarah looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates who represented billions of beings across the galaxy. Some faces showed frustration, others fear, and a few displayed barely contained hostility. Very well, she said finally. Since the Council requires an explanation, let me offer one that you may find unsettling. The chamber fell absolutely silent. Even the ambient hum of the station's systems seemed to fade as every being present focused on the human ambassador. Humanity fights differently because humanity is different, Sarah continued. We do not wage war as you understand it. We do not engage in battle as your military doctrines define it. When humans encounter the Krell, we do not fight them. Impossible, scoffed General Thrak. We have sensor data showing clear engagement patterns, weapons fire, ship-to-ship combat. You see what your instruments are designed to detect, Sarah replied. But, you do not see what matters. She activated a holographic display, showing the aftermath of a recent Krell incursion in the Centauri system. The debris field stretched across millions of cubic kilometers, yet there was no sign of the catastrophic explosions typically associated with space battles. 3 Krell hive clusters entered this system 6 days ago, Sarah explained. They encountered a single human task force consisting of 12 vessels. Within 4 hours, all Krell ships had ceased functioning. No survivors, no retreat, total elimination. How? The question came from a dozen sources simultaneously. Sarah's expression remained neutral, but something in her eyes might have been pity. You asked the wrong question, honored delegates. The question is not how we destroyed them. The question is whether they were ever truly alive to begin with. The implications hit the chamber like a physical blow. Several delegates began speaking at once, their voices rising in alarm and confusion. The Krell are biological entities, protested Dr. Senna of the Science Consortium. They reproduce, they adapt, they evolve. They are clearly living beings. Are they? Sarah asked quietly. Or are they something else wearing the mask of life? She manipulated the hologram, zooming in on individual Krell ships. At maximum magnification, strange patterns became visible in the hull structures, geometric designs that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. The Krell have been expanding across the galaxy for over 2 centuries, Sarah continued. In all that time, has anyone ever successfully communicated with them? Has anyone ever captured a living Krell for study? Has anyone ever seen them eat, sleep, or engage in any behavior beyond warfare and expansion? The questions hung unanswered. Admiral Corinth's face had gone pale. What are you suggesting? He whispered. I am suggesting, Sarah replied, that humanity recognizes patterns that others do not. We see connections where others see only chaos. We understand truths that others cannot accept. She paused, looking around the chamber one final time. The Krell are not what they appear to be. They are not a species seeking conquest or resources. They are not driven by biology or evolution or any natural imperative. Then, what are they? Chancellor Morvik's voice was barely audible. Sarah's next words would echo through the chamber and across the galaxy for generations to come. The Krell are a test. Before anyone could respond, before the full implications of her statement could be processed, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights bathed the chamber in pulsing red as automated systems announced the approach of multiple hostile contacts. The Krell had found the Galactic Council's hidden meeting place. Sarah looked at the panicked faces around her and smiled for the first time since the session began. It was not a pleasant expression. "Now you will see," she said softly, "what humanity really is." The chamber's main view screen activated, showing space around the station. At first, there was nothing visible except stars and distant nebulae. Then, like a nightmare materializing from the void, massive shapes began to emerge from hyperspace. Krell hive ships, larger than anything previously recorded, surrounded the station in perfect formation. But, as the delegates stared in horror at the approaching armada, they noticed something impossible. The Krell ships were not moving to attack. They hung motionless in space, as if waiting. "They're not engaging," whispered General Thrak. Sarah nodded slowly. "They won't. Not yet." "Why not?" demanded Admiral Corinth. "Because," Sarah replied, her voice carrying a strange resonance that seemed to echo from somewhere far beyond the chamber, "the test has not yet begun." The lights in the chamber began to flicker, and several delegates noticed that their translation devices were malfunctioning. Sarah's words seemed to be coming through clearly, but other human voices were becoming increasingly difficult to understand, as if the very nature of their language was shifting. Outside the station, more ships began appearing. Not Krell vessels this time, but craft of unknown design that seemed to bend light around them in impossible ways. They moved without visible propulsion, defying every known law of physics. "Human ships," breathed Dr. Senna. "But that's impossible. Our sensors show no energy signatures, no mass displacement, nothing." "Your sensors," Sarah said gently, "were not designed to detect the impossible." The first human ship passed directly through a Krell vessel without any apparent contact, yet the alien craft immediately went dark and began drifting. More human vessels appeared, moving through the Krell formation like ghosts through solid matter. "How?" The question came from Ambassador Zethkar, but his voice was barely recognizable through the failing translation systems. Sarah turned toward him, and, for just a moment, her appearance seemed to flicker, as if she were not quite solid, not quite real. "The answer to that question," she said, "begins with understanding what you have always assumed to be true about reality itself." As she spoke, the chamber began to change around them. The walls seemed to shift and flow, revealing glimpses of star-filled void beyond. The delegates found themselves somehow suspended in space, still breathing, still thinking, but no longer confined by the normal rules of physics. "Welcome," Sarah continued, her voice now coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, to the real universe. The transformation of reality around the Galactic Council chamber left 47 different species struggling to comprehend their new existence. They floated in the void of space, yet breathed as easily as if they stood in atmosphere. Stars wheeled around them in patterns that defied astronomical knowledge, and the familiar laws of physics seemed more like gentle suggestions than absolute rules. Ambassador Sarah Chen remained at the center of it all, no longer confined to her previous form. Her image flickered between the diplomatic figure the council knew and something vast and incomprehensible that stretched across dimensions they had never imagined. "This is impossible," gasped Dr. Senna, her multiple eyes struggling to focus on the impossible vista surrounding them. "Beings cannot survive in the vacuum of space without protection. Matter cannot simply ignore gravitational constants." "Your understanding of impossibility," Sarah replied, her voice harmonizing with frequencies that touched their minds directly, "is limited by your perspective. You see the universe through the lens of what you call physics, a set of rules that govern matter and energy as you perceive them." Admiral Corinth tried to reach for his emergency communicator, but found his hands moving through the device as if it were made of mist. "What have you done to us?" "I have done nothing," Sarah answered. "I have simply allowed you to see what was always there, hidden beneath the surface reality that your minds could accept." Around them, the battle between human and Krell ships continued, but now the delegates could perceive it on levels that transcended their previous understanding. The Krell vessels were not merely physical constructs of metal and biological material. They were anchors, tethering something vast and alien to the dimensional space that most beings called reality. "The Krell," General Thrak whispered, his compound eyes reflecting star patterns that should not have been visible, "they're not ships." "What are they?" Probes, Sarah explained, and, suddenly, the delegates could see the truth of it. Each Krell vessel was connected by invisible threads to something enormous lurking in dimensions parallel to their own. Sent by entities that exist outside the reality you understand. They test each species they encounter, measuring their ability to perceive beyond the limitations of physical existence. Chancellor Morvik's crystalline form began to resonate with harmonics that he had never experienced before. Testing for what purpose? Sarah's expression grew somber, and the space around them darkened as if responding to her mood. To determine which species are ready for the truth about the universe. Most failed the test. The implications crashed over the assembled delegates like a tidal wave. Ambassador Yixtal of the Synthetic Collective processed the information at superhuman speeds, but even artificial intelligence struggled with concepts that transcended logical frameworks. The species that fail, Yixtal's optical arrays pulsed rapidly. What happens to them? They continue to exist in the limited reality they understand, Sarah replied. They develop faster than light travel, energy weapons, artificial intelligence. They map their local galaxy and believe they understand the cosmos. They never realize that everything they perceive is merely the shadow of something infinitely larger. She gestured toward the ongoing battle, where human ships move through Krell vessels like phantoms. But, occasionally, a species emerges that can perceive beyond those shadows. They develop the ability to interact with reality on multiple dimensional levels simultaneously. Humanity, breathed Dr. Senna, understanding flooding through her enhanced consciousness. Yes, Sarah confirmed. Though perhaps not in the way you imagine. The beings you know as humans are not naturally multidimensional. We were once limited to the same three-dimensional reality as yourselves. The revelation struck the delegates with stunning force. General Thrax's mandibles clicked rapidly as he processed the information. What changed? Sarah's form shifted again, revealing glimpses of a history that spanned eons. Images flowed around them showing a younger Earth, a simpler human civilization, and their first encounter with entities that existed beyond conventional reality. Millennia ago, before humans developed space travel, we encountered beings similar to those who created the Krell. But, instead of sending probes to test us, they came directly to Earth. The space around them filled with visions of ancient history, not the sanitized version recorded in human databases, but the true story of contact with entities that existed in dimensions beyond comprehension. Massive forms that appeared as geometric impossibilities descended upon early human settlements, bringing with them technology and knowledge that should have destroyed human civilization. They offered us the same choice they offer all species, Sarah continued. Remain in limited reality and accept the protection of ignorance, or evolve beyond physical existence and accept the burden of understanding. And humanity chose evolution, whispered Admiral Corinth. Part of humanity chose evolution, Sarah corrected. The part you know as our civilization chose to remain limited, to develop naturally within the boundaries of three-dimensional space. But a portion of our species accepted the transformation. The delegates watched as the visions showed human figures stepping into impossible geometries and disappearing from conventional reality. But they did not vanish completely, they became something that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, able to interact with both the limited reality of their original existence and the expanded cosmos beyond it. We became guardians, Sarah explained. Watching over the portion of humanity that remained unchanged, protecting them from entities that would either destroy them or force premature evolution upon them. Ambassador Zethkar's 6 arms trembled as understanding dawned. The mysterious victories against the Krell. You were not fighting them in the traditional sense. Correct. We were communicating with the entities that created them, explaining that baseline humanity was not yet ready for the test. The Krell probes were withdrawn not because they were destroyed, but because their creators were convinced to delay the evaluation. The battle around them began to change as Sarah spoke. The Krell vessels started to dissolve back into whatever dimensional space had spawned them, while the human ships revealed their true nature. They were not ships at all, but manifestations of consciousness operating across multiple levels of reality simultaneously. But now, Sarah continued, her voice carrying notes of deep sadness, the protection can no longer be maintained. The testing entities have decided that humanity, and, by extension, all species in this galaxy, must face the evaluation.
Why now? Demanded Chancellor Morvick.
What has changed? Sarah's form solidified slightly, allowing the delegates to see expressions of genuine emotion crossing her features.
Because baseline humanity has discovered us.
The words hit the assembly like a physical blow. Around them, the impossible vista began to shift again, showing them glimpses of human space. But now they could see what had been hidden before: vast structures existing in parallel dimensions, entire civilizations of evolved humans working to maintain barriers between realities.
Your intelligence networks are more sophisticated than we anticipated, Sarah admitted. Several human governments have detected inconsistencies in our protection efforts. They have begun asking questions about impossible victories and unexplained phenomena.
Some have even started experimenting with technologies that could breach the dimensional barriers.
Dr.
Senna's enhanced consciousness raced through the implications. They will discover you eventually.
Yes. And, when they do, the choice between limited reality and expanded existence will be forced upon them whether they are ready or not.
The testing entities will not permit a partially evolved species to exist indefinitely. The Galactic Council Chamber, or what remained of it in their enhanced perception, began to coalesce around them once more. But, now the delegates could see it as it truly was, a tiny bubble of conventional reality floating in an ocean of dimensional possibilities. This is why we could not share our capabilities with your species, Sarah explained as the transformation stabilized. Our methods do not involve technology that can be transferred or weapons that can be replicated. We defend against the Krell by existing partially outside the reality where they operate. General Frack struggled to process the information through military frameworks that suddenly seemed childishly inadequate.
So when baseline humanity discovers your existence, the protective barriers will collapse, Sarah confirmed.
All species in this galaxy will face the choice that was given to us eons ago: evolve or remain limited, but accept the consequences of that limitation.
What consequences? Ambassador Yixtal asked, though their artificial intelligence was already calculating probabilities that produced disturbing results. Sarah's expression became grave.
Species that choose to remain limited are relocated to protected zones where they can exist without threatening the stability of expanded reality. They are given everything they need to maintain their civilizations, but they are cut off from the larger cosmos.
Relocated, Admiral Corinth repeated slowly. You mean imprisoned?
I mean preserved, Sarah corrected, but her tone suggested the distinction might be academic. The chamber around them continued to shift between conventional reality and the expanded perception Sarah had granted them. Through the walls, they could see human ships beginning to disengage from the Krell formation. But, instead of withdrawing, they were arranging themselves in patterns that hurt to contemplate directly.
What are they doing? Whispered Chancellor Morvick. Sarah looked toward the forming pattern with an expression of deep resignation. Preparing for the final test.
The entities that created the Krell have sent a direct representative to evaluate all species in this galaxy simultaneously. As she spoke, something began to emerge from the space between dimensions. It was not a ship or any kind of construct that could be understood through conventional perception. It was a presence that existed across multiple levels of reality simultaneously, vast beyond comprehension yet focused with terrifying intelligence. The evaluator, Sarah said simply. It will examine each species and determine their readiness for expanded existence.
Those found wanting will be relocated to preserve the stability of both limited and expanded reality.
The presence swept across the assembled delegates with a sensation like being dissected by pure thought. It examined not just their bodies and minds, but the very nature of their existence, their potential for growth beyond current limitations.
Most of the delegates felt themselves found lacking.
There is one possibility, Sarah said quietly as the evaluator's attention moved beyond the council chamber to examine other species throughout the galaxy.
One chance for those who choose to remain limited to avoid relocation. What chance?
The question came from multiple sources simultaneously.
Sarah's form began to fade as the enhanced perception she had granted them started to collapse back toward normal reality.
Prove that limited species can coexist with expanded reality without threatening its stability.
show that knowledge of our existence does not automatically lead to catastrophic interference with dimensional barriers.
The chamber solidified around them once more, looking almost normal except for the lingering sense that the walls were more permeable than they appeared. "How do we prove that?" demanded General Thrak.
Sarah smiled, but it was not entirely human anymore.
"By demonstrating that wisdom can exist without power, that some knowledge can be accepted without being exploited, and that species can choose limitation not out of fear, but out of understanding." The evaluator's presence touched the edge of their awareness once more, and, suddenly, every delegate understood that they were being watched, measured, and judged according to criteria they could barely comprehend.
"The test," Sarah continued, "begins now."
The Galactic Council chamber had returned to its familiar configuration, but none of the assembled delegates could forget what lay beyond its walls.
The evaluator's presence lingered at the edge of perception, weighing every thought and decision against criteria that transcended normal understanding. Ambassador Sarachin stood before them once more, appearing fully human yet somehow more real than everything else in the room.
The other delegates struggled to process what they had experienced, their minds trying to reconcile expanded awareness with the limitations of their three-dimensional existence. "The test has already begun," Sarah announced, her voice carrying harmonics that spoke directly to their enhanced consciousness. "Even now, the evaluator examines how each of your species responds to knowledge of expanded reality." Chancellor Morvik attempted to access his communication systems, but found the controls responding in ways that defied their normal function.
"We must contact our governments, warn them of what is coming." "And how will you explain it?" Sarah asked gently. "How do you describe dimensional barriers and evolved consciousness to species that have no framework for understanding such concepts?" The question struck at the heart of their dilemma.
Dr. Senna ran probability calculations through her enhanced neural networks, but every scenario ended in chaos or disbelief.
"Our people will demand proof," she said finally. "They will require evidence that can be measured, tested, replicated."
"Evidence that would destabilize the barriers protecting them," Sarah replied. "The moment any species attempts to verify expanded reality through technological means, they risk triggering cascading failures that would expose them to entities they are not prepared to encounter." Admiral Corinth stood slowly, his battle-scarred features reflecting the weight of impossible decisions.
"So we are trapped between ignorance and catastrophe."
"Warn our people and risk destroying them, or remain silent and watch them face judgment unprepared."
"Not trapped," Sarah corrected. "Tested."
The evaluator is measuring whether species can accept difficult knowledge without immediately seeking to exploit or verify it through destructive means. The chamber's lighting shifted subtly, and the delegates realized they were seeing their surroundings on multiple levels simultaneously. The walls remained solid yet permeable, the floor supported them while extending into dimensional spaces that hurt to contemplate directly.
"This is the test itself," whispered Ambassador Yixtal, "their optical arrays processing data streams that should have overloaded any artificial intelligence. Our response to impossible knowledge." Sarah nodded approvingly. "The first component measures wisdom. Can a species accept the existence of forces beyond their understanding without immediately seeking to control or exploit them?"
Around them, holographic displays materialized showing various species throughout the galaxy reacting to the evaluator's presence. Some civilizations immediately began mobilizing military forces, attempting to develop weapons capable of affecting multi-dimensional entities.
Others launched massive research programs, seeking to reverse engineer expanded reality through brute force scientific inquiry.
Both approaches triggered defensive responses from the dimensional barriers, creating spatial distortions that threatened to tear apart entire solar systems.
"The second component," Sarah continued as they watched civilizations struggle with forces beyond their comprehension, measures restraint. Can species accept their limitations while maintaining dignity and purpose? More displays appeared, showing other reactions across the galaxy.
Several species had descended into panic, their governments collapsing as populations struggled to process the revelation that their entire understanding of reality was fundamentally incomplete. But others responded with remarkable composure, accepting the existence of expanded consciousness without abandoning their own development paths. "And the third component?" asked General Thrak, though his compound eyes remained fixed on images of his own hegemony forces attempting futile attacks against entities they could not perceive properly.
"Cooperation," Sarah said simply. Can limited species work together with expanded consciousness for mutual benefit, or does knowledge of our existence inevitably lead to conflict? The chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. The Galactic Council itself was being evaluated as a test case. Could 47 different species accept the reality of humanity's evolved state while maintaining productive relationships? Chancellor Morvik's crystalline form resonated with frequencies that conveyed deep thought.
You are asking us to make decisions that will determine the fate of every sapient being in the galaxy.
No, Sarah replied firmly. I am asking you to be yourselves.
The evaluator does not judge based on specific choices, but on the underlying nature that drives those choices.
Wisdom, restraint, and cooperation are not behaviors that can be performed for evaluation, they must emerge from genuine understanding. Dr. Senna's enhanced consciousness processed the statement at multiple levels, recognizing its profound implications.
Then, our species will be judged not by what we do in this moment, but by what we are capable of becoming.
Precisely. And that capability has already been demonstrated through your presence here.
The delegates looked around the chamber, suddenly, seeing each other with new understanding. Despite their vast differences in physiology, culture, and evolutionary history, they had managed to create a functioning alliance based on mutual respect and shared goals.
The Galactic Council, breathed Ambassador Yixtal, is itself proof that limited species can transcend their boundaries through cooperation.
Sarah smiled, and, for the first time since the revelation began, the expression carried genuine warmth. The Council has existed for over 3 centuries, bringing together species that would normally be incompatible.
You have created a civilization based on diversity rather than dominance, knowledge rather than force.
Around them, the displays showing other civilizations began to change.
Some species were learning to accept their limitations gracefully, finding purpose in exploring the boundaries of conventional reality.
Others began reaching out to neighbors for support and understanding rather than seeking individual solutions to cosmic problems.
But what of the species that failed the test? Admiral Corinth asked, watching images of civilizations whose responses had triggered catastrophic barrier failures. Sarah's expression grew sad.
They will be relocated to preserve both their existence and the stability of expanded reality. Protected spaces where they can continue developing according to their own nature, but without the ability to accidentally destabilize dimensional barriers.
And the species that pass? They are offered the choice that was given to humanity eons ago.
Remain limited but aware, or accept transformation into expanded consciousness. General Thrax's mandibles clicked thoughtfully.
What percentage choose transformation? Very few, Sarah admitted.
Most species that pass the test do so precisely because they understand the value of limitation. They recognize that expanded consciousness comes with responsibilities and perspectives that fundamentally change the nature of existence. The chamber around them began to shift again, revealing glimpses of the vast structures where evolved humanity maintained their vigil between realities. Cities that existed across multiple dimensions, technologies that operated through principles baseline science could not detect, civilizations that spanned galaxies while remaining invisible to conventional observation.
We do not encourage transformation, Sarah continued.
Expanded consciousness is not a superior state, it is simply different. Limited species often possess perspectives and capabilities that expanded consciousness cannot replicate.
Such as, prompted Chancellor Morvik. Hope, Sarah replied immediately.
Surprise. The ability to find joy in discovery rather than simply knowing. Expanded consciousness perceives all possible outcomes simultaneously, we experience probability rather than possibility. The words carried a weight of loss that made several delegates understand for the first time what transformation actually cost.
You gave up wonder, whispered Dr. Senna. We gave up many things, Sarah confirmed.
But we gained the ability to protect those who still possess them.
The evaluator's presence touched their consciousness once more, and, suddenly, every delegate understood that the test was concluding.
Across the galaxy, species were being categorized based on their responses to impossible knowledge. Most would be relocated to protected spaces, not out of cruelty but out of necessity. Their attempts to weaponize or exploit expanded reality had created instabilities that threatened both limited and expanded existence. But some species had demonstrated the wisdom to accept mystery, the restraint to avoid overreaching, and the cooperation to support each other through unprecedented challenges. The council species, Sarah announced, have been approved for continuation in shared reality. Relief flooded through the chamber, but it was tempered by understanding of what this meant. They would return to their civilizations carrying knowledge that could not be shared, wisdom that could not be proven, and responsibility for maintaining barriers they could barely perceive.
How do we explain our absence? Asked Ambassador Zethkar. Our governments will demand detailed reports of this session.
Sarah gestured toward their communication devices, which suddenly displayed detailed records of a completely different meeting, one focused on routine trade negotiations and boundary disputes. The expanded portion of this encounter will fade from your explicit memory, she explained. But the understanding will remain, guiding your decisions without creating the knowledge paradox that triggered this evaluation.
And if we encounter the Krell again? Admiral Corinth asked.
You won't, Sarah replied. Their testing purpose has been fulfilled. The entities that created them have withdrawn to dimensional spaces where they will monitor continued development without direct interference. The chamber began to return to its completely normal appearance, but the delegates found themselves changed by the experience in ways they could not fully articulate. They had glimpsed possibilities beyond imagination and chosen to remain within limitations they now understood to be voluntary. There is one final thing, Sarah said as the enhanced perception began to fade.
Baseline humanity will discover our existence eventually.
When that happens, they will face the same choice offered to every species, transformation or protected limitation.
What do you believe they will choose? Chancellor Morvik asked.
Sarah's form had returned to completely human appearance, but her eyes held depths that suggested vast experience across multiple realities. They will choose both, she said confidently.
Some will accept transformation and join us in expanded consciousness.
Others will choose to remain limited but aware, working with both evolved humanity and other council species to maintain the balance between realities.
And the galaxy will change again, Dr. Senna observed. The galaxy is always changing, Sarah replied.
The only constant is the necessity of choice, what we become, what we preserve, and what we sacrifice for the greater good. The session ended as it had begun, with representatives from 47 different species gathered for what many believed would be the final meeting before war. But now they carried within them understanding that transcended the original crisis. As they prepared to return to their home systems, each delegate found themselves fundamentally changed by knowledge they could not remember receiving. They would lead their civilizations with wisdom they could not explain, make decisions guided by principles they could not articulate, and maintain peace through cooperation they did not consciously understand. The Galactic Council would endure, strengthened by a test they had passed without realizing they were being evaluated. And, somewhere in the space between dimensions, evolved humanity continued their eternal vigil, protecting the wonder of limited existence while bearing the burden of expanded understanding. The ultimate military strength of humanity was not technology or firepower or strategic advantage. It was the willingness to sacrifice their own potential for transformation in order to preserve the possibility of choice for others. They had become guardians not through conquest but through restraint, powerful not through dominance but through service. And, in the vast cosmos where realities intersected and consciousness evolved beyond physical limitations, that choice had made all the difference. Silence swept across the stars, but it was not the silence of death or defeat. It was the silence of watchful protection, of guardians standing vigil between realities, ensuring that species could develop according to their own nature without interference from forces beyond their understanding.
The test was complete. The galaxy would endure. And humanity, both evolved and baseline, would continue to exemplify the principle that true strength lay not in the power to destroy, but in the wisdom to preserve.